Welcome to Vickie's Country Home. I had a lot of requests to make sourdough bread, so that's what we're going to do today. Little bit of a warning, this video is going to take a little while, so grab a cup of coffee and settle in. I've started my sourdough starter, feeding it, getting it active a few days day before yesterday. It's really active, it's looking beautiful, so it's ready for this process. For those that haven't watched that video, basically you have a starter and then you feed it on a regular basis with all-purpose flour and water in equal parts by weight. So that is what I've done. This is about 4 feedings. So the yeasty beasties are very happy and they're ready to get to work. Sourdough bread is just, almost all the recipes are similar and then they can go from there, but they all basically have sourdough starter, which is flour and water. You add water at room temperature, not cold, not hot. You add flour and you add salt for flavoring. Anything extra is just extra and it can be wonderful, but this is just how you basically start it. I'm trying a new recipe and so I'm playing around with this. You'll get to see it at the same time that I do. So you don't have to have special equipment. I prefer to use a scale because flour can settle, it can compact, and then your texture and your moisture levels are all going to be different. And I want it to be more predictable, so I weigh everything out, usually in grams, and it's usually pretty predictable. I will be using a dough whisk to start, but again, this is not necessary. Excuse me. You can use a spatula, you can use this little scraper, these are wonderful. And best of all, I usually end up using my hands to finish the process because you want to make sure this gets totally hydrated, all the flour gets coated, because you want to give it plenty of time and moisture to get to work. So that's what we're going to do. So turn the scale on. And I'm going to weigh out 325 grams of my starter. This is 100% hydration, which means you have 50% water, 50% flour that's been activated. It's light consistency. It's not heavy, it's not stiff. This is 100% hydration. So we're going to pour in 325 grams. There we go. Now that I will put aside, and I might discard some and then feed it again, but I might make another type of bread, so for now I'm just going to set that aside. So you start with the sourdough starter. I'm going to get my spatula back out because I think I'll use it to start. And I'm going to tare the scale so it's 0. And you notice I have my spatula in there, so I zeroed it out with that in there. Now I'm going to add 450 grams of room temperature water. doesn't have to be completely exact on these things. The pioneers made this stuff every day, and I'm sure they didn't have one of these nifty little scales, so I don't stress over it too much. The biggest I worry about is the amount of flour, because it can make it dry and chewy, and that's not what we're going for. So now we're going to tear this out again and just lightly mix this. I don't want to completely stir it in, but I do want to break it up a little bit. And you'll notice it's stringy, and that's a good sign. I don't know if it gets a stringy texture in the water. Let's see if I can show you. So that's about what you do with it. Okay. So make sure it's teared out, and now I'm going to add my flour. And it always makes a mess. I just don't stress over it. So I'm going to use today a combination of bread flour, whole wheat flour, and unbleached all-purpose flour. A little bit of whole wheat, but I don't want it to be too heavy, so I'm just going to put a little bit of that. So I'm going to start out with 200 grams of bread flour. Okay. And I'm going to put in 200 grams of whole wheat flour. Okay. And now I'm going to use 350 grams of all-purpose flour. Again, this is a new recipe, so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but we're going to try it. That's the fun of making something like sourdough, because you can vary it so much, and it's mostly the technique that you're worried about. So a little bit, there we go. All right, so now we are going to mix this up. I'm going to take it off the scale so it's a better height for me, because I'm not tall. All right, so we're just going to mix these together. And this dough whisk is great. It makes this part go really quick. Be sure and get all of it off the sides and off the bottom. You want this totally, all of the flour you want completely coated. You want to give it plenty of time and opportunity to develop that gluten and turn out wonderful. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my spatula for a few minutes. Don't want to waste any of this good stuff. Okay. And you'll notice you got some in the bottom, you get it in the corners. So I'm really going to work that and get it coated, get it mixed. And once I get this pretty much mixed up, then I'm going to put my hands in there. It's a lot of fun. If you got kids, be a great job for them. Okay, now I'm going to get my hands wet. That doesn't stop the dough from sticking to you, but it helps a little bit. Okay, so just work this. Doesn't take too long, and you're not trying to knead it, you're not trying to do anything like that. All you're doing is making sure it's thoroughly mixed, and you're also trying to regulate the temperature because you need it to have time to develop the temperature, and you want it all to be the same, and that's part of the process of folding. We'll do that, and it helps to keep it evened out. Okay. So, you can see it just pretty much breaks apart, which means, and you won't expect it, that it has no gluten developed. So what we're going to do is called autolyse. And I'm going to let this sit for, about 2 hours. I'm going to flatten it out so it has about the same amount of surface all over, and that helps with the temperature. And what the autolyse is going to do, it's going to relax that flour. It's going to hydrate it. It's going to help start developing the gluten strands. We're not adding salt at this point because salt will retard that process. We want it to have time to just rest, and you will see the difference when we come back. Okay, so it's been about 2 hours, and I've let this rest covered for 2 hours. That's called autolyse because there's no salt in it. It's just the flour and water and starter. And that gives the dough a chance to relax, some of the gluten to develop. So we're going to open this up and do the next step. Okay, so first of all, let me wet my hands. I want you to see that's the difference. Before this, that would just break. It didn't stretch at all. So that's how much gluten has already been developed. What we're going to do now is add the salt that we waited on while we waited for the dough to develop a little bit. So we just spread that on there. And again, work with wet hands is so much easier. And I like to use my little scraper because it also helps. So what I do is just pull it away from one end, like that, and you want to stretch it. And it's starting to break, so that's far enough. And then we'll do this from all 4 directions. And what we're doing is we're mixing in that salt we're developing the gluten, and we're equalizing the temperature. And all those things are important, so we're gonna just do this, stretch, fold. Stretch and fold. And oh, my hands are lovely. But you know what? It wouldn't be any fun without this, so you know, we can wash them. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we've stretched and folded, but that bottom part is still, it's been on the bottom and that needs to come to the top. So we're just gonna lift this up and turn it over. Now we're going to flatten this out, put the cover on it, and then we're going to let it rest for another 30 minutes and fold it again. And I'll bring you back when we do that. Well, it's been about 30 minutes, so it's time for the second fold. We're going to do this 4, 5, 6 times, depending on what it needs. So this will be fold number 2. The first was when we added the salt. And so each time we're developing the gluten, we're equalizing the temperature. And so I don't know if you can tell how much this is stretching now. That's compared to the first time I mixed it where it didn't have any stretch at all. It would break up. Now, and the second time, before we added the salt, it had a slight amount of stretch, but not much. I want you to also notice how much less sticky it is. It's a very wet dough, and it's going to be sticky, but each time you do this, it's going to be less and less sticky, messy, and that's as the gluten develops. So we're going to stretch this all 4 directions. And again, you don't need all this stuff. I like it, it makes it easy, but it's not required. Okay, so we're going to turn this dough over again. Wet my hands. And flatten it out. Again, turning it over, flattening it out, and letting it rest. It's developing the gluten, but it's also equalizing temperature. It's all part of the process. You don't have to knead it, so this helps you do the gluten development and all those wonderful bubbles instead of kneading this and adding all that extra flour. So I'm going to do this 2 or 3 more times, depending on what it needs, and then I'll come back and show you the results. I've turned this dough, folded it 4 times since I first put it together. So now this is the 5th folding, and I want you to see, I've got wet hands so that the dough doesn't stick, but I want you to see how elastic this is. This is 5 times of folding the dough, and it's not 100%, it's still tearing, but you can see that the gluten has really worked on this, and it's not sticking to my hands like it was originally. You're just getting this nice elasticity. So, like I said, this is fold number 5, starting with the first where I added the salt. So I'm going to finish this fold, turn it over, flatten it out, cover it, and then I'm going to put it in the refrigerator overnight, and tomorrow we make bread. So I look forward to showing you tomorrow how to do that. Good night, YouTube. So, good morning. Today we're going to make this sourdough bread. I just took this out of the refrigerator. It's been sitting in there overnight, and let's see how it did. Oh, it looks wonderful. See how much it's risen? This was flat probably, in this area last night when I put it in. But we gave it really slow, cool temperatures so it could rise. And this is what we have today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some rice flour to flour my board. I like it because you're not adding a lot of regular flour that will dry and toughen the dough. We don't want to do that. We want to keep it nice and light and open textured. So we're just going to put some of this down so that the dough doesn't stick while we cut it and get it ready for the pre-shaping. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get this out of here. I'm going to wet my hands in my little spatula thing just to loosen it out because it kind of wants to stick a little bit. And just do that a little to get it started. And then it'll come out pretty much by itself. Little help. Okay, get this out of the way. Okay, so now this is the underside, and I don't know if you can see how rough textured that is. The other side is really smooth, and we're going to try and preserve that. So what we want to do now is roughly divide this in half. You can get real exact if you want. You can weigh it out. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make 2 loaves. So these are so handy. All right, now what I'm going to do is just kind of stretch it just a little bit. I don't want to manhandle this a lot. I just want to give it a little bit of shape. And you have really big bubbles like that, I'm going to pop them. I like the bubbles, but you don't want them too big, or I don't. That's me. And then I'm just going to fold and press. And again, big bubbles pop. That's that yeast, all those little yeasty beasties being happy in there. Fold and press. And if you'll notice, this is not like regular bread doughs. Even though it's a very moist dough, it's got a lot of water in it, it's not sticky. Once it gets to this point, there's a little bit, but pretty much it's really nice to handle. A little more of that. And then I'm going to set that aside and let it rest for about 20 minutes or so. Another huge bubble. Stretch it out. I hope y'all can see what I'm doing. This is kind of maybe hard to see. So I'll try it this direction. Awkward, but you might see it better. So just kind of fold and press. Oh, that's a huge bubble. There. Fold and press. Fold and press. and then we're going to just pinch it together at the ends. So now we're just going to let this sit here for about 20 minutes. Because our climate is so dry, I'm going to cover it just with little plastic bags, whatever you have, doesn't matter. You might not have to do this if you have a lot of humidity. Nevada, we don't. It's very dry. So I'm going to let this sit for 20 minutes, and then I'll come back and we'll form the final loaves and get them ready to rise before it goes in the oven. See you in a few. Okay, so it's been about 20 minutes, and we've let this bread rest for that time, and now I'm going to start shaping the loaves and get them ready for baking. So you can see they've spread out just a little bit. Mostly we're letting the dough come back to room temperature. We're letting it rest. We've been manhandling it. So he gets a chance to rest while I do things. What we're going to need here, and there's different ways of doing it. You could use tea towels that have been dusted with flour or rice flour or whatever. Because I make bread all the time, I splurged and bought a couche. I believe it's linen fabric, and this is all it's used for. When I form the loaves, I'm going to rest them in here. It'll fold up and separate the loaves. It'll give them a place to be undisturbed and protected. And then once the oven's ready, we will start the baking process. So what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to put some rice flour. And I'll have to bring you in closer to see this. But you want a nice dusting of rice flour, and that's going to help keep it from sticking. Let me see if I can get you there without making you dizzy. Okay, so about like that. And then I have cornmeal, and I'm just going to put a little bit of that, not a lot. I don't know if you could see that. So this is ready for the first loaf. Okay, this out of my way. Now we don't want to flour this board a lot because we don't want to work anything else into the dough, but more importantly, as we shape this, we want the form to, we want it to stay in that form. And if you put too much flour, it's just going to kind of slide around like that. That's not what we're looking for. So now I'm just going to stretch this just a little bit. And nothing has to be perfect. These are rustic baguettes. So just stretched a little bit, and I'm going to fold it over about a third and press it down. Pop your really big bubbles. And then I'm going to do the same in the other direction. It's just easier for me to flip it around. So again, push it down. And there's different ways of making baguettes. You can research them, you can do it however you want. This is how I do it. And I want to pinch that seam really well. Now I'm going to go into the shaping. And mostly you just want it fairly even so it will cook evenly. And again, I don't know if there's a right way or wrong way. This is how I do it. Okay, now you're going to look for the seam that you formed. And I want this to be the bottom of the loaf. So when I put it in the couche, I'm going to put the top down in the flour, and the seam will be on top. And these are going to be large loaves. My family's going to be so excited. And we hope they're good because, again, this is a new recipe. I've never made it before. In fact, I made it up the other day, so we'll see. So same thing, I've just brought the fabric up and folded it over the first loaf. That separates the loaves, protects them and gives it a chance to rest. So same thing, just put some rice flour down. And same thing with the cornmeal. So we're all set for the second loaf. And you just do the same thing. Again, big bubbles, pop them. We want that airy texture, but the big bubbles, it's like you cut a slice of bread and there's a big old hole. I don't want that, so I cut it out. Again, just stretch it just a little. Fold it 1/3 over, press it down. And same on the other side. I don't know if you can tell, but this is so easy to do. It's not a lot of work. It does take time. That's the biggest thing with sourdough is you're going to invest time, but it's not all time that you're actually doing things. A lot of it is waiting and letting the sourdough starter do all the work. You don't have to do it all. That's getting a little sticky. Just kind of move that out of the way. Okay, so now shape the loaf. And when you're satisfied, it's good. Again, seam side up, put it in the couche. Now I'm gonna fold this over. And what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna turn the oven on to 500 degrees. It has to be really hot. I use a baking stone, and that holds the heat. It just makes a nice surface. I'm going to also use this roasting pan. Sourdough requires steam in order to make that nice crispy crust that we like. Well, most of us don't have a commercial steam oven. I know, much as I love this thing, it doesn't have that. So instead, we create our own little oven inside. So you use the bread stone, pizza stone, and it preheats with the oven. You want it to be nice and hot when you put the bread in. And then 5 minutes before the bread's gonna go in the oven, we're going to put this roasting pan in there to heat up too, because we want that to be nice and hot. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the oven on to 500, and while that preheats, and it will take a while, we're gonna let this bread just sit here and rest. It probably will rise slightly, but not really a lot, but that's okay. That's exactly what we want. So I will see you soon. All right, the oven's almost up to temperature, so I'm gonna go ahead and put my roasting pan in. I want it to get heated up, and I'll do that while I get the loaves formed. So I have my baking stones there. I'm just gonna put the pan in on top and get nice and warm. Actually, pretty hot. And I'm gonna use parchment paper because these loaves are pretty large and they're gonna be a little awkward to move around if I don't do that. So I'm just putting that on top of a cookie sheet, and that'll help me transport it into the oven. All right, so now I'm going to lift up the couche, and I'm gonna show you how this came out. They've risen a little. They're just beautiful. That is the second loaf I formed. So let me see if I can get you close enough to see what I'm doing here. Now this is tricky because you've got to take this loaf without disturbing it too much and move it onto here. So what I'm going to do is use a breadboard. Just thin piece of board. It has a little beveled edge. And I'm going to set it right next to the loaf. Now this is the bottom of the loaf. We put the seam on top, if you'll remember. So what I'm going to do is just lightly put cornmeal on this edge of the bread so that I can take the board, and I'm just going to lift up the couche and roll it onto the breadboard. And now the top, which was facing down, is now on top. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm going to move you back so you can see this part, all I have to do is gently slide this off. And that extra cornmeal, all that does is prevent it from sticking to the board. That's all we care. Okay, so just get that where I want it. Make sure I've got room, because when I put this in the oven, I want these to have room to spread out. So I'm going to do the same thing. Do this so you can see it. I'm going to do the same thing for the other loaf. A little bit of cornmeal. Put the board down and flip it on. And as easy as that, you're moving the 2 loaves of bread, and you don't have to disturb them too much. And they stick off the end a little bit of this paper, but I really don't care, because it's gonna go onto the baking stones, and it'll be fine in there. All right, now what I want to do, I'm going to remove some of this excess rice flour and cornmeal, because I really don't care for it to be on there. So I'm just going to take a pastry brush, lightly brush it, but you can do the same thing with your hands. You know, make do. You don't have to go buy everything. Try it, see if you like doing it, and then if you like it, then you gradually invest. But you really don't have to spend all that money right up front. Improvise. So we're going to get, you don't worry about every bit of it, but I'm going to get the majority off. That served its purpose, and that's really all I need it for. So, all right, so that is cleaned off. Now what we have to do is we have to put some slashes in this bread, because sourdough, it cooks so quickly it will form a crust, and we want it to expand quickly. And I believe that's the reasoning behind all this. I don't know, but that's how you do it. So just take my word for it. Okay, so I believe this is called a lame, but basically it's a little handle with a double-sided razor blade. You can also use a sharp knife. You don't have to use this, but again, I make a lot of bread, so I spent the money. And you just put this at an angle, and you want a deep slash. And I'm not good, so I just usually do 2. And water helps keep it from sticking also. So I'm going to do that and do, like I said, fairly steep slashes on this. There we go. And do the same to the other one. All right, so that's all done. Now, these guys are ready for the oven. So I'm going to refocus this, and I'll bring you back to put them in. Okay, I have to work quickly here because I want to get these into the oven, get moistened and covered up and back in so that I don't lose a lot of heat out of the oven. So here we go, and I hope you can see this well. So this is nice and hot. I'm going to pull that out to make it easier to transfer the bread. Now I just take the cookie sheet, move that onto there, and then what I'm going to do is, this is just plain water, and I'm going to spray this well because I want to create a whole lot of humidity. So I'm just spraying it down well, creating the humidity. Now I'm going to put this very hot roasting pan over it, just like that. Push it in, get the oven closed. Now I'm going to turn it down to about 450. It's very hot. Now it's got that heat in there. A little bit lower temperature is fine. So now I'm going to let that bake for about 20 minutes covered. Hopefully what that's going to do is that's going to give it the rise and start that really awesome crust on the outside that we like. So I will bring you back when it's time to do that. Oh, and by the way, you don't want to wash the couche that you put the bread in to rest. So I just take all that excess flour and everything that was on here, take it to my back door, give it a couple really good hard shakes, then roll it back up for next time. Very easy. All right, so it's been 20 minutes. We're gonna open the oven and take that roasting pan off and see what it looks like. And this is very hot. So look how large these got. I'm gonna kind of flip this around. I want it to bake evenly. So these are looking beautiful. I'm gonna push that back in, and I'm gonna wait about 20 minutes and check it, and when I think it's time, I will bring you back. Okay, it's been about 25 minutes since I took the cover off of this, so I'm going to open it up and show you what it looks like. It's got a nice dark crust on it. And I'm going to put it here on this, and we're going to check it. It has a nice hollow sound and a beautiful color. So I believe this is done. Okay, let me get you where you can see this a little better. So you want sourdough darker than you want normal bread. I love regular bread recipes, sandwich bread, all of those, but this is just different. You want this nice crust on it, and when this cools, and we're gonna let this completely cool, as tempting as it is to cut it open and eat it right now, because I love warm bread with butter, we're going to let it cool completely because we want this crust to stay. We want the inside to stay nice and moist and open. So we will let this cool completely. When we serve it for dinner, we normally heat it up a little bit. So you get that warm bread, but you give it time to do what it needs to do here. So I will bring you back probably this evening when we have some of this bread. So that's it for now. Okay, so I went into town, spent the day running errands. I'm done. Not my favorite thing. So the bread is cool. We're going to cut it and we're going to see how it turned out. I'm anxious to find out because this is a new recipe. Use a serrated knife. It really makes a better cut. So that's the inside of the bread. It's a nice soft crumb inside, nice crunchy outside. Okay, so see, we have some nice bubbles, but they're not too large. That's just about right. This is a little bit denser than one made with all white flour, all-purpose and bread flour, but I wanted a little bit of whole wheat in there. So this is what it looks like. And like I said, it's got this wonderful crunchy crust, but the inside is moist and just really nice. So I'm going to try some of this and let you know how it is. And of course I have to have some butter on it. Just wouldn't be right without it. Nice and crunchy. Just enough whole wheat. And I think that's a good recipe. So I'm going to say this is a winner. So thank you and success. Well, it's June 12th. Olive is laying in front of the nice cozy warm fire because she's old and gets cold. So she's happy right now. Because outside we have this. It's not supposed to be this cold in June, but it's Nevada. You never know. Thank you for sticking with me to the end. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and we will meet again soon.